So I looked into the history of Queen Ethelberga, who was a very pious, extremely pious Christian woman from Kent, who married a king up in the north. And when she got married, she went up there with all her maidservants, and they were all pious as well, and they all wore scarves. And she introduced the scarves into the Christian faith up in the north, which I thought was quite interesting. So, which came out in speech day, although I think she would have been horribly embarrassed had I, she's a teenager, she doesn't want to see her mother standing up there in front of all her mates. She's fine, she respects my decision, which is good. I'm hoping that some of it will rub off on her. As we know, there's no compulsion in religion. I can't force her into this faith, and I wouldn't try and force a teenager to do anything. But I'm hoping that she'll be more, she certainly is more open. She comes on a lot of trips with me. And my mother is in her 80s, and her reaction to my conversion was she started to go to church again. And I said, well, that's great. At least you're getting some spirituality back in your life already. Islam is having a positive effect. And I said to her last year, Mother, I said, you do so many things that are Islamic. Christianity is a great springboard. It's not a huge leap of faith. It's just a little step to make. And you can make that step. And she said, oh, I don't want to get involved in your newfangled Arab religion. And I said, well, where do you think Jesus comes from? Manchester. And for me, every stained glass window shows this blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy who could come from Manchester. And for the first time, she started realizing that the roots to Christianity were in the same soil as the roots to Judaism and Islam. So, but I haven't managed to convert them yet. And I've got two sisters. One has no connection with Muslims and thinks I'm going to go off to Tel Aviv and blow myself up. The other one lives next door to a family of Muslims, and they've been neighbours for over 20 years, and happily they've been great neighbours. So it was a positive thing as far as my sister was concerned, but it wouldn't have been if they'd been the neighbours from hell.
You were talking about how journalists, you believe they are the eyes and ears for us. Obviously now that you've faced that stereotypical view, are your opinions still the same? And do you not believe that in your job, or not you particularly, but a lot of other people, they do bring in, it's that Chinese whispers, they hear something different, but they pass on something different?
Journalism is a fantastic profession. I think it's a very noble profession. But it is becoming more and more hazardous, attempting to tell the truth these days than it was before. Unfortunately, parts of the profession are in the hands of knaves and fools, and that is very, very sad. However, there are glimmers of hope every now and again, and I actually think that the change won't come from within the journalists. I think it will come from the readers, because as shocking as you'll see headlines. With the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Sun headline was something like, he's handed Al-Qaeda a victory on a plate. I think that readers, the majority of ordinary people, can actually see that there is this agenda in the media to bash up the Muslims. And it's not just the media, though, it's coming from the government as well. And when you get somebody like the government minister, Phil Willis, talking about Muslim inbreeding, you think, if you'd listened to what he had to say, you would have thought that Frankenstein-like babies were filling the maternity wards in Bradford and Burnley and Oldham, where his constituency is. And the reality, you know, he was talking about the elephant in the sitting room that nobody will talk about. And he was talking about cousins marrying cousins. Well, it's perfectly legal in this country for cousins to marry cousins, for first cousins to marry first cousin. I personally wouldn't recommend it, but then you haven't seen my family. But, you know, if he's worried about inbreeding, surely he shouldn't be looking to the Muslim community. He should be going to see the Queen. Because if you look at most of the European royals, there are some serious matches going on in amongst the European royals and the aristocracy. It was an absolutely hateful thing for him to bring up and whip up headlines for, as though it was, you know, this huge problem. And it's a bit like the forced marriages. Forced marriages are not Islamic at all. They are simply not Islamic. But I looked into this when it was becoming an issue, and the Home Office told me 2-3 years ago that there had been 100 cases of forced marriages reported. And I said, well, that's not very much actually, is it? And they said, oh, it's 10 times worse than that, 10 times worse. And I said, well, 10 times 100 is 1,000. 1,000 is not an epidemic in a community where more than 2 million Muslims are. And, you know, I got this sort of begrudging acknowledgement, well, it's, you know, it is an issue, and it is an issue that we need to tackle and that we should tackle. But it's not headlines. I'll tell you what is headlines. 1 in 3 of our kids are fat. You know, that to me is a serious problem. We're becoming, you know, we're bringing up fat kids, overweight, obese kids. Now, that's the elephant sitting in the living room, or the couch potato with the Game Boy machine. You know, that is a huge problem. But Phil Wallace, if you look into his history, he was the MP for Oldham. Now, when the statisticians from the Labour Party started looking at the general election predictions, they pulled Phil Wallace aside and said, look, we've lost the Muslims. There's no way we're going to get the Muslims back over Iraq, over Afghanistan. We think that, you know, you're going to pay the price for Labour. And what he then did, instead of wasting his time trying to get Muslim votes, because Muslims aren't known to be that politically active, he whacked the Union Jack onto his literature and he went for the white, working class, often neglected vote, and traded on the politics of racism to get votes. And against all the odds and in defiance of all the predictions, not only was he re-elected, he increased his majority with this strategy. The strategy, I have to say, of Jörg Haider from Austria and the fascists in the Dutch government. And that political move worked. Now, if ever there was a blinding flash for Muslims to get politically involved, that was it. And I don't know, I don't have any connections with the Muslim community in Oldham, but I really do want to make a point of one day getting up there before the next general election to say, this man hates Islam, he hates Muslims, punish him at the polls by voting in a smart way and get him out. Because he is a vile, horrible man who is using, as I say, the politics of the far right in Austria and the Netherlands, and he's to great effect.
You know, you were saying, when you stated that it's our fault. Not our fault, but we can't, it's us lot, we can do something about it. So like to state that, you know, we are, day by day, getting quite lazy and quite naive, and we do believe what we hear. Another question that I've got for you is, are you, you know, you write for different newspapers, and you stated, are you pressurised by your editors as to what you can say and what you can't say? sometimes, you know, some journalists might have the true story